I never thought buying a piece of land in Wyoming would turn into a horror comedy movie, but here I am, telling you this from the exact spot where it all began. You see, I imagined freedom, wide open spaces, the kind of land where you could yell at the wind and nobody would answer back. I pictured myself sipping coffee on the porch of my little cabin, watching deer stroll by and maybe, just maybe, fencing in my property like a responsible adult. Simple, right? The first thing I noticed when I arrived was the silence. I mean, a real silence, the kind that presses against your ears and makes you hyper-aware of every tiny sound. A crow cawing, the rustle of tall grass, the faint roar of an engine miles away. And it was beautiful. It felt like the kind of peace you read about in those magazines, the ones with perfect skis and rolling hills. I parked my truck, got out, and inhaled that crisp Wyoming air. The smell of earth, dry grass, and pine hit me like a welcome home hug. I was finally here. My land, my freedom. Then I saw it, small, almost invisible signs posted along the edges of my property. They weren't official looking, no government seal, no surveyor's stamp. Just little yellow placards with neat letters. HOA property line, do not encroach. At first I laughed. HOA here? In Wyoming. I thought HOAs only existed in cookie-cutter suburbs where people argue about lawn gnomes and mailbox paint colors. Not out here where the nearest neighbor is half a mile away and the closest town is a 40-minute drive. But the signs were real and there were a lot of them. Enough to make me pause. Still, I shrugged it off. I had plans, big plans. I had bought wood, metal posts, wire fencing, everything to mark my little kingdom. I imagined driving the first post into the ground, each one a statement, this is mine. This is my land. I rolled up my sleeves, ready to dig in. And I did. The first hole went perfectly. The second one, too. By now, I was in the rhythm of hammering, measuring, planting posts. I was picturing my fence stretching across the horizon. A symbol of control, of victory, of, well, maybe just adulting, really. Then I heard it. A low, humming sound at first, so faint I thought it was my imagination. But it didn't go away. It got louder, and then I froze. My hands were midair, shovel poised. Above me, a shadow moved fast, cutting across the ground, and I looked up just in time to see it, a helicopter. A real, hovering, sky-eating helicopter, and it was coming straight for me. At first, I laughed nervously. Okay, weird, I muttered to myself. Maybe it's a news crew, maybe a wildlife survey, but as it hovered closer, spinning blades slicing the sunlight, my stomach sank. It wasn't a news crew. It wasn't a survey team. The helicopter had a loudspeaker and a voice boomed down, calm but chilling. Sir, you are in violation of HOA regulations. Cease all fencing immediately. I stared, mouth wide open, shovel halfway to the ground. Did I just hear that right? HOA regulations. Violating, for a fence. On my land, I looked around, half expecting someone to jump out laughing, but there was no one. Just me, the wind, and a helicopter that seemed to be studying me like I was an exotic animal. My first instinct was disbelief. My second instinct was panic. My third was, well, stupidity. Hello, this is my property, I yelled up. IUH, what do you mean, stop? The voice repeated the order, flat and unyielding. And that's when I realized this wasn't a prank. This wasn't a neighbor giving me a hard time. This was serious, way too serious. And suddenly, my dream of building a peaceful fence, my vision of marking my land, felt like a battle I didn't even know I'd signed up for. I mean, what's next? Parachuting HOA inspectors, drones surveilling my hammering skills. My hands trembled, my heart raced, and I had to make a choice. Continue building my fence and risk escalating whatever the hell this was, or stop and try to figure out how a homeowners association in Wyoming has a helicopter ready to lecture me. I didn't know it yet, but that day, standing under that buzzing rotor blade was just the beginning. And by the time it ended, I'd have a story so ridiculous, so absurd, that no one would believe it. But trust me, every word is true. After my heart rate finally slowed down from the helicopter incident, I stood there, shovel in hand, staring at the first post I'd hammered into the ground. My fence. My dream, now apparently a federal, or at least helicopter-level, crime. I felt a mixture of disbelief, anger, and that creeping kind of fear you get when you realize the universe might actually be watching you for sport. I tried to laugh it off because what else could I do? I mean, seriously, Wyoming, wide-open spaces, and some HOA decides to show up in a helicopter just because I want to put up a fence. I waved my arms like a maniac, shouting into the sky. Hello, can we talk? I'll stop. I mean, I just want to, can we negotiate? The rotors spun above me, kicking up a mini tornado of dirt and grass, and the voice came again. Calm, controlled, terrifyingly unbothered by my panic. "Sir, cease all activity. Immediate compliance required." I froze. My first thought was maybe if I stand really still, they won't see me. Yeah, that was logical for a cartoon. My second thought was maybe I can reason with them. "Listen," I shouted. "I just bought this property. I'm legally allowed to build a fence." And then it hit me, what if I wasn't allowed? I'd never even read the HOA rules. I mean, who does that? No one ever thinks, hey, I should read 73 pages of Wyoming HOA statutes before hammering a wooden post into the ground. So I did what any rational adult does in the middle of a slowly escalating absurdity. I called the HOA. My phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice came through, clipped and formal, like they were reading from a script. "Sir, you are in violation. You must stop fencing immediately or further action will be taken." I blinked. "Further action? What does that even mean?" The voice didn't answer. Instead, I heard that hum of the helicopter again, closer this time. I ducked instinctively, though I had no idea why. I was 6 feet tall and the helicopter wasn't landing. My heart was racing so fast, I could hear it in my ears. Then I looked around and noticed something strange. The ground wasn't just empty. There were tire tracks leading from the horizon toward my property, deep and deliberate, almost like a warning. I followed them with my eyes, and at the far edge of my land, half buried in tall grass, were little markers, red flags, tiny fences, and more of those ominous yellow signs. "Property line. Do not encroach." At this point, it was no longer funny. Someone or some organization was making it very clear I was being watched. My mind raced. Was it just the helicopter, or were there others? Hidden cameras, spies disguised as deer? I shook my head, trying to laugh it off. But the laughter was hollow, because in that silence, punctuated by the rhythmic chop of rotor blades, I realized that this was more than just a simple misunderstanding. I glanced at my first post again. It looked innocent enough, standing tall and proud in the earth. But now, to me, it felt like a red flag in a bull ring. A tiny, wooden provocation that had summoned a hovering enforcer from the sky. And I was the idiot standing underneath it. I tried reasoning with myself. Maybe it was just a warning. Maybe if I stopped and waited, they'd leave. Maybe, but then, there it was again, the loudspeaker crackling through the rotor wash, cutting through my thoughts. "Sir, cease all fencing. Immediate compliance required." And that's when panic fully set in. My arms went weak, my legs trembled, and my mind went somewhere between I'm in a bad action movie and I've clearly angered some Wyoming land deity. I wanted to retreat, but retreating meant abandoning the post. My hard work, my dream, and something inside me snapped. "No," I whispered, not loud enough for the helicopter to hear, probably. "I'm not stopping, not yet." My hands tightened around the shovel. My eyes narrowed at the spinning blades above. I felt a surge of defiance that I couldn't explain. It was irrational. It was dangerous. It was me. Little did I know, that decision, to even consider continuing, was going to turn my peaceful land into a battlefield, my dream of fencing into a full-blown standoff, and my life into a story so ridiculous that nobody would ever believe it. And all of it started with a single wooden post and a helicopter that seemed to have nothing better to do than hover menacingly over me. I stepped back, looking at my property like it was a chessboard, and I realized I had entered a game where the rules were invisible, the opponents were aerial, and every move I made could escalate things to a level I couldn't even imagine. And I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to give up without a fight. I froze in place, eyes glued to the helicopter. The rotors were a blur above me, chopping the air so violently that dust and grass swirled in little tornadoes around my boots. The hum was deafening, but the loudspeaker cut through it with terrifying clarity. "Sir, you are violating HOA regulations. Cease immediately." My stomach dropped. Violating HOA regulations on my own land in Wyoming. I pinched the bridge of my nose and whispered to myself, this can't be real. It just can't. And yet there it was, hovering like a steel eagle, as if it had been waiting for me to hammer that first post. I tried reasoning out loud. "Listen, I just bought this property. I have the legal right to fence it." But the helicopter didn't answer. It just hovered, blades cutting the sky, turning my words into static that disappeared into the wind. Panic started creeping in. My eyes darted to the surrounding hills, half expecting snipers or hidden cameras. My mind went through every movie, TV show, and news story I'd ever seen where helicopters were involved, and none of them ended well for the guy on the ground. My hands shook so badly I dropped the measuring tape. It spun across the dirt like it had a mind of its own. I looked back at my fence post. It sat there innocently, a tiny piece of wood in a sea of grass. And yet in that moment it felt like a declaration of war, a challenge. I could practically hear it whispering, "You will regret this." Then I noticed something even stranger. From the helicopter, a rope ladder, or at least something that looked like a rope ladder dangling. My heart jumped into my throat. Did they actually expect someone to rappel down onto my property? I imagined a team of HOA enforcers dropping from the sky, clipboards in hand, ready to find me for my audacity. I laughed nervously at the thought, but the laugh was hollow. I tried to negotiate. "Can we talk about this? Is there a way I can?" The voice cut me off. "Sir, cease fencing immediately or further action will be taken." "Further action," I muttered, my voice barely audible over the wind. What the hell does that mean? My mind raced. Fines, lawsuits, a SWAT team descending like in some dystopian reality show. All I wanted was a simple fence. I wanted a boundary. I wanted peace. The helicopter hovered closer. I squinted, trying to see if anyone inside was actually looking at me, or if it was some kind of automated intimidation machine. I couldn't tell. The blades made it impossible to hear anything else, but I felt the gaze. Like it was sizing me up, like it knew every inch of my plan before I even thought it. And then it spoke again. "Sir, this is your final warning. Cease immediately." Something in me snapped. I was furious, terrified, and absurdly proud all at once. My hands gripped the shovel so hard my knuckles whitened. "No," I said aloud, though the helicopter couldn't hear me. "I'm not stopping. I'm not giving up my land. I paid for this. It's mine." I knew I was insane. Everyone would say I was insane. But standing there under the blades of a hovering machine that seemed to mock me, I felt something else too, defiance. That stubborn human spark that refuses to back down, even when logic screams at you to run. I started packing in a small circle, trying to figure out my next move. Should I call the police? Could I even call the police without escalating things? Should I just abandon the fence and run, tail between my legs? Every option felt worse than the next. And all the while, the helicopter stayed, watching, judging, waiting. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement on the horizon. A pickup truck slowly approaching, dust rising behind it. Someone was coming. My pulse jumped. Were they neighbors, HOA enforcers, or someone else entirely? I took a deep breath and squared my shoulders. This was no longer just about a fence. It was about standing my ground, about facing a bizarre and terrifying authority that I never even knew existed. And in that moment, I realized, whatever happened next, my life was about to change forever. Because when a helicopter shows up to tell you to stop fencing your own land, you quickly learn that freedom in Wyoming comes with rules you can't even imagine. And those rules aren't just written on paper. The pickup truck moved slowly over the horizon, kicking up dust in long, lazy clouds. At first, I thought maybe it was a neighbor coming to warn me. Maybe someone had called the cops, maybe something. But as it got closer, my heart sank. It wasn't a neighbor. It was an HOA official. Yes, an HOA official, in Wyoming, driving a pickup, and apparently in league with the helicopter. I stepped forward, trying to seem calm. "Hello," I called. "Can we talk?" The driver didn't slow down. The engine growled, tires crunching over the dirt, and the vehicle stopped maybe 20 feet away. The driver leaned out the window, a clipboard in hand, a grim expression on his face. He looked like he meant business, and his business apparently included my fence. "I'm here regarding your activities," he said, his voice flat, official, unyielding. I swallowed hard. "Activities," I repeated, trying not to let my panic show. "You mean hammering a fence post?" He nodded. "Yes, that, sir. You are violating HOA regulations. Section 7, Article 12, Subsection B, you must cease immediately. You've been warned." I blinked. Section 7, Article 12, Subsection B? I didn't even know my HOA had sections, let alone subsections. What? This is my land," I shouted, gesturing wildly. "I bought this. I can fence it however I want." He gave me that cold, bureaucratic stare that makes your stomach twist. Ownership doesn't override HOA guidelines. This is for the safety, appearance, and well-being of the community. You may resume fencing only after filing the proper permits and obtaining HOA approval. I froze, my mind couldn't process it. My land, my dream, my single innocent fence post, trapped under the gaze of a hovering helicopter and a pickup truck full of HOA enforcers. Permits, approval. This isn't a suburban cul-de-sac. This is Wyoming. We're supposed to have space here. And then my eyes caught something on the ground. More markers, red flags, yellow signs. Someone, or something, had been systematically mapping every inch of my property, delineating my boundaries. I stared at them like they were alien symbols, blinking in disbelief. "Sir," the driver continued, "failure to comply will result in fines, legal action, and if necessary, removal of your fence at your expense." Fines, legal action, removal. I couldn't believe it. My dream fence, a tiny wooden post anchored in the soil, was suddenly an act of criminal defiance. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. Instead, I swallowed hard and tried to think. Think, don't panic. But it was impossible. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to grab my truck, to leave the land and never look back. Yet another part of me, the stubborn, ridiculous, slightly insane part, refused to back down. This is my property. I'm not quitting without a fight. I looked up at the helicopter again. It hovered silently, engines roaring like some mechanical beast, watching every move I made. My hands shook, and I realized just how surreal this had all become. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of thoughts swirling in my head, but it was impossible. The helicopter hovered above like a predator, spinning its rotors in a rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart. The pickup sat 20 feet away, engine idling, clipboard-wielding HOA enforcer staring me down like I was some villain in a Western movie. And there I was, shovel in hand, alone, outnumbered, and somehow expected to negotiate with the skis. I paced in a small circle thinking, okay, there's got to be a way out of this. But every option I considered seemed worse than the last. If I stopped now, they'd win. My dream fence would never exist. If I continued, well, the helicopter might descend like an executioner. "Sir," the voice from the loudspeaker boomed again, cutting through the roar of the rotors. "Cease all fencing immediately. This is your final warning." I swallowed hard. Final warning. My stomach twisted. Final warning. I had been dreaming of this fence for weeks, imagining the posts lined up like soldiers, marking the edges of my property, and now, some hovering authority was threatening me like I was defacing the Louvre. I glanced around, searching for anything I could use. My truck was nearby, half buried under supplies. The pile of fencing material looked innocent, but moving it felt like trying to smuggle a small army past a radar system. And the helicopter, well, it made moving anything impossible. Every time I shifted, the shadow above me seemed to judge my audacity. Then I noticed the subtle movement in the grass behind the pickup. At first I thought it was the wind, but no, there were more people. Hidden observers, neighbors, another HOA team. My pulse spiked. I had no idea how many of them were watching me, but the implication was clear. Every move I made was being monitored. Every inch I dug, every post I hammered, every breath I took, watched. I gritted my teeth. My mind raced through possibilities, some ridiculous, some desperate. Could I bluff them? Pretend I was calling a permit office while secretly continuing? Could I dig faster than they could process legal threats? Or maybe just talk to them, reason with them. Maybe there's a loophole. I stepped toward the pickup, shovel in hand, trying to seem calm. "Look," I said, voice shaking despite my effort. "I just want to mark my land. I've read the HOA rules, or tried to, but—" I stopped. My words seemed pitiful against the mechanical growl above and the silent stare from the driver. "Sir," the loudspeaker crackled again. "No discussion, cease immediately." Panic mingled with defiance. I felt like a cartoon character, standing alone in the middle of an impossible standoff. I imagined the helicopter swooping down, a rope ladder dangling, armed HOA enforcers descending to find me for daring to hammer a post. My imagination ran wild, absurd and terrifying all at once. And then something clicked. If they were watching my every move, maybe I could outsmart them. Maybe this wasn't about brute force. It was about patience, observation, and just enough courage to act when they least expected it. I crouched behind a post, pretending to inspect it while keeping one eye on the helicopter. The driver in the pickup was packing now, clipboard tapping against his hand in a rhythmic, infuriating way. I whispered to myself, "Okay, think like a spy, move like a ninja, or, just don't get fined into bankruptcy." Time slowed. Every second felt like a lifetime. Dust blew across the plain. A crow cawed somewhere nearby. My heart thumped so loudly I thought the helicopter must hear it. I imagined the stories my neighbors would tell. Some guy tried to build a fence and a helicopter showed up. No one would believe it, not even me if I weren't living it. I took another breath, tightened my grip on the shovel, and made a decision. I wasn't stopping, not yet. I'd find a way, some way to keep building my fence, to mark my land, to stand up against the absurdity of a hovering helicopter, a clipboard army, and invisible HOA laws stretching across the plains of Wyoming. And at that moment, I realized something chilling. The standoff wasn't just about a fence anymore. It was about pride, stubbornness, and the ridiculous human desire to claim a piece of land, no matter what the world, or the skis, threw at you. I glanced up at the helicopter one last time. Its shadow stretched across the grass, huge and menacing, and I whispered to myself with equal parts fear and determination, "Bring it on." Because I was ready, or at least, as ready as any sane person could be when facing a helicopter, a pickup full of HOA enforcers, and the most ridiculous battle of their life. I could feel the helicopter above me like a ticking clock, each blade rotation counting down to my inevitable doom. The driver of the pickup leaned back against the hood, arms crossed, clipboard in hand, giving me a stare that could freeze molten lava. I knew I had to do something, anything, before this standoff became permanent. I swallowed hard, trying to sound calm despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. "Look, I don't want trouble," I shouted toward the pickup. "I just want to fence my property, that's it. I don't want fines, I don't want lawsuits, I don't want—" My voice trailed off as the helicopter roared closer, its shadow stretching over me like some mechanical god judging my existence. "Sir," the voice crackled through the loudspeaker again, calm but terrifyingly final. "This is your final warning. Cease immediately." Final warning. I couldn't believe it. I'd barely hammered 2 posts, and yet here I was facing a hovering army in the sky and a human embodiment of bureaucratic wrath on the ground. My brain scrambled for solutions. Negotiation, bluff, bribery. My mind wandered to all the YouTube videos I'd ever seen about HOA battles or land disputes. None of them involved helicopters, but hey, I had to start somewhere. I took a deep breath and tried a different approach. I raised my hands, palms open, a universal symbol of surrender or maybe diplomacy. Okay, I said, trying to sound reasonable. "Let's talk about this. There has to be a way we can work this out. I'm willing to get permits, sign forms, pay fees, whatever it takes. Just, please let me put up my fence." The driver tapped his clipboard. "Sir, negotiations are not part of the process. Compliance is mandatory. You may not proceed under any circumstances." I blinked. Not mandatory, not part of the process. What kind of process even needs a helicopter? I swallowed, panic creeping in again, but I couldn't stop thinking about my fence, my posts, my dream. I glanced at the first post I'd hammered, standing like a sentinel against the absurdity of it all. And then inspiration struck, or maybe desperation disguised itself as inspiration. I crouched slightly, pretending to inspect the post while muttering under my breath, hopping the helicopter thought I was just measuring or adjusting. "Sir, we are monitoring your activity," the voice boomed. "Any further violation will result in immediate action." Action, that word alone made my palms sweat. But I realized something. If they were monitoring me this closely, then every move I made mattered. I could use that. I could slow them down, confuse them, maybe even negotiate indirectly by showing that I was willing to comply, but just barely. I started packing in a tight circle, talking to the driver in a mix of sarcasm, charm, and terror. "Okay, look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If I promise not to hammer more posts today, can we maybe agree on a timeline? I'll apply for permits, submit paperwork, whatever you need. The driver shook his head, tapping his pen on the clipboard. "Sir, there is no timeline. You must comply immediately." My stomach twisted. There was no room for negotiation, no loopholes, no escape. And yet I couldn't stop. I was too far in, too stubborn to give up. I swallowed the fear, clenched my jaw, and whispered to myself, "All right, let's play their game." I knelt down by the first post and pretended to make notes on a small pad I pulled from my pocket. Every movement was calculated, careful, like I was defusing a bomb. The helicopter hovered closer, almost mocking me, and I forced a grin. "See," I muttered to myself. "I'm cooperating, I'm reasonable. No need to deploy whatever it is you plan to deploy." The driver scribbled something on his clipboard and finally muttered, "We'll be reporting this interaction." Great reporting, whatever that meant. I imagined a giant file somewhere labeled, "Crazy Landowner versus Helicopter, Case Hash, Wyoming, Outcome, TBD." And yet, in the middle of all this absurdity, I realized one thing: I hadn't backed down. I was standing on my land, shovel in hand, under a hovering helicopter and a clipboard-wielding enforcer, and I was still there. Not running, not hiding, not giving up. The standoff wasn't over, not by a long shot. But at least now I knew one thing for sure: if this was going to be a battle, I was going to fight it, with every ounce of ridiculous stubbornness I had. And little did I know, things were about to get even crazier. By the time the sun had climbed higher, baking the Wyoming plains under its merciless glare, I realized something crucial. If I wanted that fence built, I couldn't do it in the open. Not with the helicopter above, not with the clipboard-holding HOA enforcer glaring at me like I was some criminal mastermind, and not with the possibility of fines, lawsuits, or public humiliation hanging over my head. I had to be sneaky, ridiculously sneaky. I crouched behind the first post, heart hammering, eyes darting between the hovering helicopter and the stationary pickup. The rotor's shadow stretched across the ground, a constant reminder that I was being watched, and I realized something hilarious, terrifyingly hilarious. I had become a spy on my own property, a spy with a shovel. I muttered to myself, "All right, Operation Fence Freedom, begin." The first step was reconnaissance. I inched closer to the pile of fencing materials, careful to stay out of the helicopter's line of sight. Every time the blades spun overhead, I froze like a deer caught in headlights. I timed my movements between the shadows, imagining myself as a stealthy ninja, though really I looked more like a frantic guy hopping over tufts of grass. I picked up a few posts and carried them slowly toward the next hole, crouching low and pretending to examine the dirt. I whispered under my breath, "Okay, one post at a time, don't screw this up." The helicopter hummed ominously above, almost as if it could sense my defiance. I imagined it reporting to some unseen HOA commander, target moving toward violation zone. I hammered the next post in, slowly, deliberately, like my life depended on it. My hands shook, but I refused to stop. I imagined the helicopter above taking notes on my technique. Incorrect hammer angle, violation. I muttered, "Yes, yes, angle correct, ignore the rotor above me." Then came the wire. Stretching it between posts felt like threading a needle in a hurricane. Each movement had to be calculated. Every glance upward at the helicopter had to be timed. I thought about all the YouTube videos I'd watched about stealth operations and realized none of them prepared me for fencing under aerial surveillance. Suddenly, the driver in the pickup leaned back in his seat and squinted. I froze mid-step, heart hammering. Was he noticing me? Had I been caught? My mind raced through ridiculous scenarios. He's calling for reinforcements. They're going to deploy drones, maybe even a rope ladder again. I stayed still, pretending to measure the fence line, heart pounding in my ears. After what felt like an eternity, the driver scribbled something on his clipboard and leaned back again, muttering to himself. I exhaled slowly, barely daring to smile. Encouraged, I moved to the next post. And then something even more absurd happened. A gust of wind picked up, whipping dirt and grass into my face. I stumbled, barely keeping hold of a post, and the helicopter wobbled slightly as if annoyed by the turbulence. I muttered, "Really? Now the weather is against me." I hammered that post in one swing at a time, ignoring every instinct screaming at me to run. And as I stretched the wire between posts, I realized something magical. I was actually doing it. The fence was slowly taking shape, post by post, inch by inch. My fence, my land, my victory. But then inevitably it happened. The helicopter shifted. The shadow moved faster. The loudspeaker crackled. "Sir, halt immediately. This is not optional." I froze, hand on the post, sweat dripping down my forehead. I glanced at the pickup. The driver was staring. No words were exchanged, but I felt the silent challenge. And in that moment, I realized just how insane this situation was. I was standing on my own property, secretly building a fence, while a hovering helicopter and a clipboard holding enforcer dictated every move. I grinned despite my fear. "You think you can stop me?" I muttered to myself. "I'm not giving up, not today." And with that, I hammered the next post into the ground, one swing at a time, feeling like a rebel in a Western movie, a spy in the wild, and a ridiculous homeowner all at once. I had no idea what would happen next, whether I'd finish the fence or get fined into oblivion, but one thing was certain: I was not going to stop. Because sometimes, standing your ground means defying logic, fear, and even helicopters. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows across the Wyoming plains when I hammered in the last post of my fence. My arms shook, my back ached, and my hands were covered in blisters, but there it was, the beginnings of my boundary, stretching across my land like a silent rebellion. I stepped back, proud but exhausted, and then looked up. The helicopter was still there, hovering, judging, mocking maybe. I swear the shadow on the grass looked smug. I could hear the faint crackle of the loudspeaker. "Sir, you are in violation. Cease immediately." I took a deep breath. My heart pounded, adrenaline still roaring through my veins. I had two options: pack up, admit defeat, and let the HOA win, or stand my ground and face whatever consequences came next. I tightened my grip on my shovel, not to fight exactly, but as a reminder that I wasn't backing down. The pickup truck started moving toward me, slowly, deliberately, dust rising in its wake. I squinted at the driver, who leaned forward, clipboard in hand, studying the fence I had painstakingly built. My palms were sweating so badly I thought the shovel might slip. Then something miraculous or insane happened. The driver leaned out the window and said, almost incredulously, "You've finished it." I blinked. "Yes," I replied cautiously, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's done, one post at a time." He muttered to himself, scribbled furiously on the clipboard, and finally sighed. "Well, technically, it's within the property line, and you did follow some of the guidelines at least." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I stared at the fence, my masterpiece, my act of defiance, and suddenly felt a surge of relief and pride. The helicopter above hovered a little higher, as if conceding the battle, though I wasn't sure they actually could concede anything. "Sir," the loudspeaker crackled one last time, "further violations will result in—" The rest of the message was drowned out as the helicopter banked and drifted away, leaving me standing on my land, triumphant but still slightly shaking. I sank to the ground next to the last post, wiping sweat and dust from my brow, and let out a long, exhausted laugh. The absurdity of it all hit me. Me, on my own property, battling a helicopter, an HOA enforcer, and invisible rules that seemed written by someone who had never seen a cow or a prairie. And yet here I was, victorious, ridiculous, alive. I looked at my fence stretching across the grass, the posts standing like sentinels in the fading light, and realized that this was more than wood and wire. This was my claim, my rebellion, my story, and it was absurd, hilarious, and perfect. As I packed up my tools, I noticed a small group of deer approaching, curious but cautious. They paused at the edge of the fence, sniffing, and then slowly wandered along the boundary, as if inspecting my work. I chuckled. Even the wildlife seemed to approve, or maybe they were just bemused by the strange human drama that had unfolded on their land. I leaned against the last post, thinking about the day from start to finish. The dream of wide-open space, the first post hammered in with pride, the sudden arrival of the helicopter, the standoff, the negotiation, the secret, ridiculous plan. Every insane moment had led to this. And despite the fear, the panic, the absurdity, and the moments I genuinely questioned my sanity, I realized something important. Sometimes standing your ground, even when it seems hopeless, irrational, or downright ridiculous, is worth every heartbeat of fear. I laughed again, louder this time, because if anyone had seen me, they would have called me crazy. And maybe I was. But I had fenced my Wyoming property, helicopter warnings and all, and no one could take that away from me. As the last rays of sunlight stretched across the land, I took a deep breath and muttered to myself, "So this is freedom, Wyoming style." And in that moment, with the helicopter gone, the pickup truck returning to wherever it came from, and the fence finally standing, I felt a strange mix of relief, triumph, and pure absurdity. I had won, but I knew one thing for sure. In Wyoming, even the quietest, most peaceful land can hide battles you never saw coming. And sometimes, the fight for your own backyard is more dramatic than anything Hollywood could script. I smiled at my fence one last time, thinking about the story I'd tell anyone who would listen. A story of stubbornness, bravery, and absurdity. A story of a helicopter, an HOA, and one homeowner who refused to quit. And somewhere deep down, I knew that no matter how many more rules, warnings, or helicopters came my way, I would always stand my ground, post by post, fence by fence, ridiculous as it may be. Because sometimes, claiming what's yours is worth facing the impossible, even if it comes with a helicopter. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one, the truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.